Thanks to Peter and the Second Front team for having us here. Really appreciate it. Haven't sat in a formal row for a while, so thanks for that. Really looking forward to a conversation with General Raymond, who you all know from his 38 years in the United States Air Stroke Space Force, right? You defected there at the end. I think it'll be good conversation with someone who was seen as a risk taker and who built actually a digital force or attempted to. But first, sir, could I talk to you about West Point? So my research says that your great-great-grandfather, then your great-grandfather, then your grandfather, then your father all went to West Point. And my research also shows you did not go to West Point and you joined the Air Force. So what were you thinking?
That's all true. I kiddingly tell folks, well, the reason why I get asked that all the time, why I joined the Air Force. Well, it's because I grew up in the Army and I went that way. Just kidding. When my dad was a battalion commander in Germany, we lived on an Air Force base. And that was kind of my first taste of what Air Force was. I went to Clemson University, the Harvard of the South, and they had a great Air Force ROTC program, and I decided to go that way. My dad never put any kind of pressure at all on me, and I just knew I wanted to serve, and it seemed like it was a better fit for me.
Yeah, I think it worked out for you. So thanks for that, and thanks for serving for all those years and leading the Space Force. And I thought I'd take you a little bit back. When you were still technically in the Air Force, I think it was the Fukushima nuclear reactor problem meltdown in the spring of 2011, and you were posted to Japan. Can you talk to us a little bit about your reaction to that tragedy, that incident?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think for me personally, there's two big things that came out of it that I tried to instill later in my career. March 11th, I think it was March 11th, 2011. There was a 9.0 earthquake, a tsunami, and then it damaged the Fukushima nuclear reactor disaster, the disaster plant. And we were providing support for the government of Japan to help recover. There's two lessons that I took. The first one was, and I'll tell a little bit of a story. There was radiation, low-level radiation being spread across Japan. And we were measuring that. We had sensors to measure it. We were flying aircraft over top of Japan to measure that, but we didn't have a way to display it. We didn't have a common operating picture for radiation. And it was causing challenges. There was challenges between, how close could you get to the power plant and still be safe. There was difference in thought between the Air Force and the Navy, difference in thought between Japan and Washington. And we really needed to pull this together. We couldn't come up with it. So I called Google and said, "This is Brigadier General Raymond, I'm in Japan. I need help. We need to figure out how to do this. How would you do it?" And they said, "There's a Google Tokyo would love to help you. They got 600 folks there that are volunteering, helping, trying to save their country. Go see them." And no kidding, I walked across the street from my office, got in a helicopter, flew 14 minutes down to Marty Barracks, which is the helipad there in Tokyo, and the Google office was in the high-rise building right next to it. And I went up this 30-something floor, walk into an all-white room. Two folks come in with laptops, and I explained to them what we're trying to do. And no kidding, in about 10 or 15 minutes, they turned their laptop around and said, "Here's how we would do it." I said, "Man, that's perfect. How would I do that?" And they said, "Well, you just need to know somebody that knows Python, and we'll teach them." I had never heard of Python. I had no clue what that was. I said, "Okay, I'll figure it out." Flew back to my office, got sent a message out across all the forces in Japan. Anybody know Python? 2 people. A first lieutenant at Yokota and a brand new airman had just come in the Air Force. I mean, just within weeks of coming in. A C-12 flew that young man back up to Yokota to get him up there so he could then go down to Google. The funny story was he showed up and he had like 40 pounds of luggage. And at the time, the space available rule said you can only have 35 pounds of luggage, so they sent him home. I'm like, hey, this whole plane is for this kid. He's the most strategically important airman in the entire United States Air Force. He can bring everything he owns on that plane. Just get him up here. And no kidding, the next day they went down to Google, and I've lost, and don't quote me on it exactly, but a few days later, we were up and running. And I remember thinking to myself, how would I have done that in the military? And we couldn't have, not at that speed. The second thing that I got out of that was the value of partnerships in the space business. In the national security space business, we didn't have the international partners that we really needed. Those partnerships are largely on the NASA side, on the civil side of space. And so I saw the value of, to Japan, having partners either they're on the ground or deploying in to help. And that was the other big takeaway for me, that when I came back, and if I ever had an opportunity to have an influence on the space business going forward, I wanted to make sure that this central to that was our ability to have partnerships. In a global business, you have to have global partners, and that's allied partners, that's intelligence community partners, that's commercial partners, non-traditional partners. We need those partnerships in a big way.
I think that's a great story. And I think it also speaks to how you were just a brigadier general at that time. Again, how you thought, but also the informed risk that you were willing to take as you moved up the ranks. Can you talk a little bit about when the Space Force was forming and how you, I think from the beginning, you and your team wanted to build a digital force and also a force size to be able to be agile, right? Which in this system takes some challenge. But how'd you get there? How'd you do it?
I think that instance that I talked about, that story I talked about in Japan, was the example to what I thought we needed to have. That the most of the challenges that we find in space are big data challenges. You experience the domain through data rather than living there, unless you're an astronaut. And there's only like 600 something people that have been to space. So I knew we needed to have that. The problem was, I went to Clemson. I didn't see a computer with a mouse until I was in the summer between my junior and senior year. We did the card hopper thing, and a cyber attack back then was when your roommate mixed up the cards and it didn't work.
Who in this audience knows what he's talking about? Yeah. There you go.
I wasn't the expert. These two lieutenants came to me and they said, "Hey, we need to build this service." We were thinking through, we wanted to be bold. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We didn't want to just iterate off of what we've been doing. We wanted to go big. And they said, "Hey, so you got to build this as a digital service." I said, "What does that mean?" And they said, "Well, first of all, we need to have software coders. We need to have that resident in the service." And I said, "Okay, go design it." And they went back, and about, a month later, they came to the Pentagon and briefed me on the design. I ran that through some experts in that business, and they said, "Do that." And so what I have seen is the young talent that we're attracting. And as I went around to universities around the country, the thing that attracted our nation's youth was software and data and speed and innovation. That's what really excited them. We have more people knocking on our door wanting to come in the Space Force than we can take. It's a really, really small service. And I think one of the reasons that's the case is that we wanted to be an innovative service. So when we were doing the design of the service, I talked to a lot of people. How should we design it? Everybody said, flat and small. You got to be able to go fast. And plus, there wasn't a big, huge appetite for big and slow. So we built it flat and small. But I think one of the challenges that we faced, we sized it. I remember when we first stood up, they came to me, and the Air Force had done some what if planning. What if there's a law? How would we do this? And the thought was you're going to have a staff at the Pentagon. There was going to be 1,035 people. I was the A3 of the Air Force, and we had like 50 people running around the staff, running around the entire headquarters that was doing space. I said, "Okay, we're going to go from 50 to 1,035. What are they going to do?" And what I realized after slashing it to 600 was what they're going to do is go to a lot of meetings, because we might have undercut, because we wanted to go fast, we wanted to be small, we wanted to be innovative, but you had to have enough mass to be able to just operate inside the Department of Defense. We're never going to be the biggest service. It's not a manpower intensive thing. And we would fail miserably if that was the case. but you got to have enough mass to be able to work the process. And when we started out with 600, that was what we're going to go to over the course of like 3 or 4 years. We had the first year we had about 100, and COVID hit, and 75% were teleworking. Yeah. So it was a significant challenge. And I think that's probably the thing that one, I don't know if we could have gotten the people in the seats that fast, but I think we really needed to look at where we sized appropriately to be innovative, but also effective.
Yeah. And so I think you're relatively unusual in understanding the outside world, in understanding that commercial technology is moving faster. You had ways of reaching over the wall and getting out. For the people sitting in this room, what would you recommend they do in order to present themselves well to the next J. Raymonds, right? Because we all hope and we believe that they're there, but people who willing to listen, willing to take a risk, right, want to hear from people like this.
First of all, I think what you need to take away is you're really important. We need you. If we're gonna be successful, we have got to move at speed. We have to be innovative, and we don't have a patent on that. In fact, if as I have thought through this a little bit, I think one of the big shifts that I have seen in the innovation business, it's largely shifted from government-led to commercial-led, and it's largely non-traditional commercial. So a lot of what we did in the Space Force in trying to, the other thing, we were really lucky in the space business, and I say this kind of jokingly, there's a big explosion in commercial space stuff. A terrible word to use in space, but it was a huge opportunity for us, and we wanted to be able to leverage that opportunity. And so I would tell you, the big thing is there's not enough people on the inside that know how to work with you. And I think the same thing applies, that there's probably not a lot of people that maybe in your organizations that understand how to work with the government. And I think what we tried to do was to try to bridge that through several ways out at the Space Systems Command in LA. We've had some success. I wouldn't say we have cracked the nut by any means, and there's a heck of a lot of work to do, but I would tell you, know that you're important. Help us help you. Very similar to what the members of Congress set up here, but at a different level. And then go after the meaty requirements that we have that are really tough problems to solve, where you might have an innovative way to do it.
And obviously that's one of the things that offset this symposium is designed. It's what Second Front spends a lot of time doing, is connecting people. When we were talking earlier, you talked about the shot clock having been moved down, just like in baseball, right? That where we were 25 years ago is not where we are today. Can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think the example that I use, if you were a GPS satellite and I wanted to buy a clone of you, an exact clone, same arm, same leg, everything, just an exact clone of what we have, that's a 5-year deal at a minimum. It's 2 years just to get dollars, and then you got to do long lead parts and you got to build it. And because there's only, GPS is not a great example of that because there's more of those than other satellites in our constellations, but because there's not a lot of you and they're expensive, we put a lot of mission assurance on it to make sure that, and you don't get a do-over if you launch and it doesn't work. So we get into this spiral that is the business model that we're in today. We are trying to break that business model. You go look at other companies, they have more of an assembly line approach. If you have an assembly line approach, the big example is the proliferated LEO constellations that are being developed. If those materialize and develop, you then have an assembly line where you can take a little bit more risk, because if you don't work, it doesn't matter because another one's coming off the assembly line tomorrow, and you're not breaking the national treasury. And so one of the things that I have seen, if you go back to like Bernard Schriever in the beginning of the ICBM program, he did all of that in 5 years. So I think we knew how to go fast before. And my sense is we got complacent. The Cold War ended, peace broke out. There wasn't the sense of urgency that clearly we face today with the competition that we're in. and that we've got to get our muscle memory back on how to do that. What you'll find is you'll find organizations that are designed to trim around the edges, like rapid capability offices. I think it requires and they've been effective, very effective, but I think we need to take a more broader, holistic approach and make some fundamental changes to be able to move at speed. And that's the thing that concerns me. That's the thing that on the space side, with all that's going on, I think there's a huge opportunity. And if we don't leverage that opportunity, we've lost an advantage for our nation.
And part of that is, frankly, educated political leadership that will apply pressure, right? So arguably the Space Force wouldn't exist without presidential White House pressure, right? It drove it into reality. Part of the Ukraine support system is because Congress and the president are driving that kind of. Do you think we need a significant event in order to shock this system into
I hope not,
what's necessary?
Because that'd be really bad if it did. Yeah. I mean, and I think one of the challenges that we face on the Space Force side was that this had been talked about for 30 years. Back in the Rumsfeld Commission, talked about having an independent Space Force. Excuse me. It didn't. That conversation picked back up in earnest in 2016, and then from 2016, 17, 18, there was a series of NDAs that began to set the foundation, if you will, for that. And then in 19, it was created. That if you look at it, it was created at a time when we were still the best in the world in space. Us and our partners, we were still the best in the world. We took an opportunity to make that change so we could move faster and stay the best in the world in space. That also comes with a challenge, because now, why do we need you? We were doing just fine under the Air Force. Well, trust me, I was in the Air Force. I know, that was me. But there's no doubt, there is absolutely zero doubt that we are better in space today than we were 3 years ago or 4 years ago. And it's nothing against the Air Force. If you elevate to an independent service, you elevate the chief's voice, or the CSO's voice, in requirements and dollars and joint operating concepts. I mean, the list goes on and on, in attracting personnel, in developing international partnerships. It's just everything gets elevated, and you're able to do things that we could not do before. Let me give you one example on the personnel development side. In 2016, when I was Air Force Space Command Commander, the number of lieutenant colonels in the Air Force that go to senior service school or a fellowship, don't quote me on the exact number, it's 300 and something. 300 and something. Guess how many space operators went out of that 300 and something? 3. 1%. And then you look at promotion rates to lieutenant colonel and colonel, were 20 percentage points below the Air Force average. That's all changed. Promotion rates are at or above the Air Force average. We're at the point now where we can't even send another person because we can't sustain it. We're sending people to school. In fact, this this fall, we're going to stand up. I'm talking like I'm still in the service. We're not. They're going to stand up a war college and intermediate service school here in town at Johns Hopkins, coupled with an innovatively coupled with a university. They'll get a master's degree from Johns Hopkins. They'll get the value of their instructors, the value of PME instructors that will bring in, have a tie to Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. That it's completely changed that. And so I rambled so long I didn't even remember what the question was. But
well, no, small and agile, right? So what's the warning signs you will watch for to see that it's getting bureaucratic?
Wow. I think the big thing that the Space Force needs to do over the next decade is make a pivot from the infrastructure, the on-orbit infrastructure that we have today, to a more proliferated, resilient architecture, capitalizing on commercial and capitalizing on international partners. I think we did that initially. The very first mission area that we focused on was on missile warning and missile tracking. We brought the entire Department of Defense together. Congress, in legislation, because we did so well, said the CSO is now responsible for force design across the department. The JROC said The Space Force is now responsible for integrating joint requirements, space requirements across the department. We've made a lot of progress. What I see us needing to do is to continue to make that pivot. That pivot is hard though, because if you try to change the business models from the GPS model that I talked about to a proliferated assembly line approach, what you have to tell the country, what you can't tell the country is, hey, we're going to turn off GPS in this example and wait about 10 years and we'll be back to you. That doesn't work. Or we're going to turn off missile warning and we're going to build something new. You got to keep the old alive as you make the pivot. That requires a balance of risk. And we need to, and the interesting thing is when you're dealing with the military, if you're dealing with a combatant commander, they're thinking 1, 2, 3 years in front of them. If you're talking to a service chief, they're talking palms ahead because they want to get to the future. And that's that healthy tension. The interesting thing was for the first year, I was both. I was the combatant commander and a service chief. And no kidding, I built a palm and then yelled at myself in my combatant commander hat in front of the DMAG. I said, no, this guy's stupid. He can't do that because he's taking too much near-term risk. And I won. So you gotta, so where we need to make sure that we can make that pivot and that we don't get stuck in the same, we're going to continue down the path that we've been in. That's a losing.
And when you were head of the Space Force, what did you do to make sure that you saw beyond the Beltway? Not that you guys aren't inside the Beltway, but, you know, beyond, I'll say, the traditional legacy providers. I
think, again, we were lucky in the fact that there was an industry that was really blossoming, and other services might not have had that. And so that was one advantage we had. The other advantage that we had that we were new. It's a lot harder to pivot the battleship than just to build new. And also with being new, we probably batted above our pay grade and interest from people that wanted to interact with us.
Oh, and you had a TV show, forgot.
And we had a TV show. I'll tell you, in my retirement ceremony, did anybody watch the Netflix show or the Space Force show on Netflix? I got interviewed a lot about that, and they would always ask me, what do you think about it? And I just try to deflect it, and I'd just say, hey, they picked the wrong actor. They should have picked Bruce Willis. And Steve Carell heard about that, and right before the show started, he said, I want to meet General Raymond. It was under COVID, we did a Zoom call. And he starts off, so I hear you wanted Bruce Willis. And he said, well, so then if you watch the second episode, the second series, second season, they're walking down, I don't know what show, it's third or fourth show, and they're walking down a hallway, and there's actors that are playing a Chinese delegation, and they're looking at pictures on the wall, and they said, Bruce Willis. And Steve Carell says, no, he has too much hair. That was the link to that phone call. But at my retirement ceremony, they reached out to him and he did a clip. And he said, hey, General Raymond, you might have heard that we weren't renewed for our second season in the show that I played you. And so we have a lot in common. So if you ever want to do anything, I'm totally free. If you want to do hot yoga, if you want to do whatever, it was hilarious. But on that, though, it got word out, and I think it actually helped us in a way that it was so silly. In some ways, it helped get the word out that there is a thing called a Space Force, but I was happy that it was so silly that people realized that it wasn't completely real.
Almost, yeah. A couple questions about the international environment, right? When you were in the service, and maybe even now, do you wake up every night thinking about our adversaries, or are you pretty comfortable where we are? Two, besides the big rocks, big adversaries, are there smaller countries or leaders who are developing space capabilities at a speed that we might not be tracking? I know the Space Force is, but this group it would be interesting to be aware of.
Yeah. People ask me a lot, what keeps you awake what kept me awake at night? And I would say sleep apnea. But other than that, I think the big thing was what I talked about, the pace and needing to go fast. And it wasn't the threats that I knew about, it's the threats that I didn't know about. And I just saw folks moving very fast. And that's the thing that was concerning. With our partners, as we started developing these partnerships, the partnerships were largely one-way partnerships. We gave data to our partners. And we had a program called the SSA sharing program, and I refer to it as more along the lines of the SSA giving away program, because we weren't getting a whole lot of return, for some exceptions. Canada has a satellite that was feeding us, and most of that problem wasn't our international partners' problems. It was our problem because we didn't have the systems to be able to ingest that data, and we didn't have the way to know if the data, to score the data, if you will, on its accuracy. It was our problem, not their problem. What I have seen is, with the establishment of the Space Force, the U.S. leadership across the globe in space is really on the rise. And if you look at what other countries have done since we've established the Space Force, France, Germany, Japan, the UK, Australia, Italy, Spain, I left one or two off, have all elevated space in their countries in the way that makes sense for them. And if you look at all of those countries, they all have plans for growth. And so our goal was to partner early on with them to help them build capabilities that would be complementary to ours and that will be interoperable like in all other domains. So I think there's huge opportunities there, internationally. And as I said, we would be remiss if we didn't capitalize on the commercial capabilities that were being built. I also think we need to look at partnering with other countries. Let me give you an example. We had a requirement to build 2 communication satellites to cover the northern part of the globe, and Norway was building 2 satellites, and they had some spare capacity on those satellites. Hey, can we just put our payload on your satellites? That saved us about over $1 billion and will get us onto orbit 3 years faster than we would have, because we didn't have to build a satellite. We're doing the same thing, putting hosted payloads on Japanese satellites. So now we're maturing away from just one-way data sharing. We now train together, operate together, war game together, build capabilities together, which I think, again, will help us. And if you look at the foundation of the National Defense Strategy, which is integrated deterrence, it helps feed that integrated deterrence piece, which is using all domains and all of our allies and partners for deterrence.
Can I just take the Norway example? What was the flash to bang on that? How did that take an act of God to allow you to do that? Or, how'd you get it done?
The initial reaction was no. And then
how many no's did you get?
we got a couple no's, but we had a great partner in John Hyten, who was commander of Stratcom at the time, and we were able to work it out and get to a yes. It took a little while to get to a yes. We need to get faster at that. But it was absolutely the right thing to do. And like I said, it saved us a significant amount of dollars and increased our speed.
I think that's what sometimes frustrates non-traditionals is it's a good idea. It's what they would call a no-brainer, right? But how do you get through the system in order to make it actually happen? I apologize. I meant to ask you at the beginning, you used to be in the Air Force, Space Force. Sorry, now what are you doing for fun and profit?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I'm really happy I'm here, but my wife is even more happy because we moved out of our base house and we're living in a small apartment. She has me 24 hours a day living there, and she's ready for me to go do other things. I spent the first couple months doing nothing. Spent the next couple months talking to friends and mentors on getting some advice on how to do this next chapter, and then spent the next couple months talking to folks that had opportunities. And I was looking to have a portfolio approach which would keep me in more on the commercial innovation side, high tech. I wanted to have a role in, or a voice in policy to help continue to advance policy. I wanted to have a voice in education and have a role to help continue to mentor young folks. And so I landed in a really good spot. Just yesterday, I started my first day at work. I work for Cerberus Capital out of New York. And day one on the job was yesterday, so I'm doing in processing. I also have a relationship with CSIS, so I can help advance the policy discussions. I'm on a couple commercial space board. I really wanted to get the intersection of commercial, national security, and civil, all the domains together. And I'm on a board of Axiom Space, which is building a commercial international space station. And then I'm an advisor for a company called LMI, so I have this little portfolio. And then on the give back side, I was an ROTC cadet. I was an Arnold Air Society. It's a service organization part of ROTC. I'm the chairman of the board of trustees for that organization across the country for ROTC cadets. And then I sign up to mentor general officers in National Defense University. So I have my hands on things that really excited me and where I was passionate about. So I'm very lucky and appreciate all the help and guidance and counsel.
Well, appreciate your leadership when you were in. We really appreciate you taking risks, what other people would call risks, informed risk, but pushing the system inside. I would argue many people do even more when they're finished their uniform service. So thanks for that. Thanks for coming today. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all very much.